Welcome to the Book Voices channel. If you enjoy our content, don't forget to like and subscribe to stay updated with our latest book discussions. Now let's dive into today's book.
Okay, so I was reading this thing, right, and it totally blew my mind. This jewelry store, they had all this turquoise jewelry, and it just wasn't selling, like, at all.
Hmm.
And then, I swear this is true, they accidentally doubled the price.
Really?
And guess what? Sold out. Completely. It's like, what? So that got me thinking about, all the assumptions we make, how our brains just jump to conclusions sometimes.
Yeah, I think that story perfectly captures what we're going to be diving into today.
Exactly. We're going deep into the psychology of persuasion. You sent over Robert Cialdini's book, Influence, right? So we're going to unpack that.
Yeah, it's a classic for a reason. He really lays out how we can be influenced, often without even realizing it.
Right. So the goal here, I guess, is to kind of give everyone a bit of a guide.
A guide to persuasion.
Yes, a guide to persuasion. So you can understand what's going on, why you make the decisions you do, and maybe even spot those tactics when they're being used on you.
Because once you understand these principles, you start to see them everywhere.
Literally everywhere. Okay, so the first big idea Cialdini talks about is this concept of automatic influence.
Right, the idea that we often respond in certain ways, almost like we're programmed to do so.
Robots. But yeah, okay, so he uses the example of a mother turkey, how they'll automatically care for anything that makes that cheep, cheep sound.
Right, even if it's not their own chick.
It's totally instinctual. And he argues that humans, we have those kinds of automatic responses too.
Oh, absolutely. There's that classic experiment by Ellen Langer, the one with the Xerox machine.
Wait, remind me about that one.
Okay, so she had people try to cut in line at the copier. And they found that people were way more likely to let them cut if they used the word because, even if the reason they gave made no sense.
Like, because I have to make copies, which is like, duh.
Yeah, but the thing is, it worked.
So you're saying it wasn't actually the reason, but just the word because that triggered people to comply.
Exactly, like a mental shortcut.
Click where.
Click. Whir! And that leads us right back to your jewelry story. Those vacationers, they didn't know much about turquoise, so they used price as a proxy for quality. Extensive equals good, right?
So they basically fell for a mental shortcut.
And while these shortcuts are often helpful, they can be exploited.
Like, I'm thinking about those examples from the animal kingdom, right?
Oh, right, like the firefly that mimics another species' mating signals just to lure them in and eat them.
Yeah, that one. Or the saber-toothed blenny, pretending to be a cleaner fish so it can sneak a bite out of bigger fish.
Talk about sneaky.
Pretty devious. And we see that in human interactions too, though maybe not quite so dramatically.
Right, like the contrast principle.
The contrast principle.
You know that thing salespeople do where they show you the really expensive item first?
Like at a clothing store, right? You go in for a sweater and they're like, let me show you this amazing suit.
Exactly. And then suddenly the sweater doesn't seem so expensive anymore, even if it still is.
It's all relative.
Our brains are wired to compare. And this is a key insight for you, for everyone listening. It's not about being cheap or extravagant. It's about realizing that our sense of value can be manipulated.
Yeah, I guess it's good to be aware of that. Okay, what else do we have? Oh, reciprocation.
Ah, yes, the rule of reciprocation, that you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours principle.
Right. It's like deeply ingrained in us, right? We feel obligated to return favors, gifts, even just concessions.
It's fascinating. There was this experiment where a researcher sent out Christmas cards to complete strangers.
Really?
Yeah, and a bunch of those strangers actually sent cards back.
That's so wild, but it shows how strong this feeling is, right? Like nobody wants to be seen as a moocher.
Exactly. We're programmed to reciprocate. And that can really influence our decisions.
Yeah.
You know, there's this study by Reagan where they had this guy, Joe, selling raffle tickets.
Okay, so Joe's selling raffle tickets.
Right. And sometimes he'd buy people a Coke beforehand, a little unsolicited gift. And guess what? People who got the Coke bought twice as many raffle tickets, even if they didn't even like Joe that much.
No way.
So that sense of embeddedness, it actually outweighed their personal feelings about him. It's powerful stuff.
So even if you don't particularly like someone or what they're selling, that pull of reciprocation can still get you.
Exactly. And we see this all the time, right? Think about those Hare Krishna people who used to give out flowers or booklets before asking for donations.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Even if you weren't interested, it was hard to just walk away. You felt obligated, right?
Totally. And I bet that works even better when you don't see it coming. Like, didn't Cialdini mention something about a disabled American veterans mailing?
Yeah, they included free address labels in their fundraising letters,
Sure.
and the response rate almost doubled.
Just from those little labels.
Uninvited favors work. They create a sense of obligation.
Okay, so we've got to watch out for those gifts with strings attached.
Definitely. And there's another tactic, too. The rejection then retreat technique.
That sounds intense.
Imagine a Boy Scout comes up to you, right, and asks you to buy a $5 raffle ticket. You say no.
Yeah, probably.
And then he says, okay, how about a $1 candy bar?
Ah, I see what he did there.
By retreating to a smaller request, it seems like a concession, a favor even. So you're more likely to say yes.
Like you owe them something for being so reasonable.
Exactly. It's all about manipulating that sense of fairness.
So how does this play out in the real world, like on a bigger scale?
Oh, there are plenty of examples. In fact, some argue that the Watergate break-in was approved partly due to this technique.
Oh.
Remember G. Gordon Liddy?
Vaguely. Remind me.
Well, he initially proposed this outlandish $1 million plan for the break-in.
$1 million.
Yeah, it was crazy. But then he came back with a supposedly scaled-back plan for $500,000.
Okay, so it's getting a little more reasonable.
And finally, he offered a bare-bones plan for $250,000, which is what they went with.
So it's like they felt pressured to say yes to something after all those concessions?
Exactly. And there's research to back that up. A study at UCLA found that people who are on the receiving end of this rejection then retreat strategy, they actually feel more responsible for the final agreement.
It's almost like they think they bargained them down.
Right. Even though it was probably all part of the plan.
Sneaky. So how do we protect ourselves from this?
The trick is to recognize it for what it is. A compliance tactic, not a genuine negotiation. If you suspect that's happening, mentally reframe the situation.
Okay, reframe the situation. So for example, that inspector who tries to give you a free fire extinguisher, right?
Great.
But you realize he's just trying to get his foot in the door to sell you a whole security system.
Exactly. So you mentally categorize that extinguisher as a sales tool, not a gift. And you are much less likely to feel obligated to buy anything.
Okay, got it. Reframing. That's good advice. What's next? Commitment and consistency. This one seems pretty straightforward, right? We like to be consistent with our past actions and beliefs.
Yeah, we have a deep-seated need to appear consistent, even if it's not always in our best interest. Think about Sarah and Tim.
Who are Sarah and Tim?
Cialdini talks about this couple. Sarah chose Tim over another guy, and even though he kept messing up, not marrying her, still drinking too much, she actually became more devoted to him.
So the fact that she'd already committed to him made her double down, even though he wasn't exactly Prince Charming.
Exactly. And Cialdini also talks about how horse race bettors become much more confident in their horse after they've placed the bet.
It's like once you've made a decision, you have to justify it to yourself.
Right. Even that transcendental meditation example. People invested money in it, and even when the logic didn't quite add up, they clung to the belief that it would work.
Because they'd already put skin in the game.
Commitment fuels consistency. And toy manufacturers, they know this.
Okay, what do toy manufacturers do?
Well, think about what happens around Christmas. They heavily advertise these must-have toys, create huge demand,
And then what?
and then they intentionally undersupply them. Parents promise their kids the toy, but then can't find it anywhere. So they buy substitutes. But then, after Christmas, the original toy is back in stores. And parents, feeling guilty, often end up buying it anyway.
Oh, that is devious. So these companies are manipulating our need to be consistent with our promises.
And it works. So
Yeah.
the lesson here for you is to be mindful of those initial commitments. Because once you've taken a stand, even a small one, it can be very hard to back down.
And that plays into the whole foot in the door technique, right? You start with a small request and then...
And then you hit them with the bigger one. Like that study where they first asked people to sign a petition about beautifying the neighborhood.
Okay.
And then later, they asked those same people if they would put a huge "Drive carefully" sign in their front yard.
Oh, no. Did anyone agree to that?
Way more people who had signed the petition agreed compared to those who hadn't. Because they'd already taken that first step, they'd started seeing themselves as civic-minded.
And the Chinese POW camps during the Korean War, didn't they use this too?
Yeah, it's a pretty disturbing example, but it shows how effective this principle can be. They started with small requests, like getting prisoners to write something slightly critical of America.
And then it escalated from there.
Right. Eventually, some prisoners were even making public statements against their own country.
So those initial, seemingly harmless commitments?
They paved the way for much larger concessions. And once those actions were made public, it was even harder to back down.
Public commitments are powerful. Think about weight loss clinics that encourage clients to share their goals with others.
Yeah, and that woman Cialdini mentioned, who quit smoking by publicly promising her ex-boyfriend she would. Even after realizing he was a jerk, she kept going because of that promise.
Wow. So public accountability can really work.
It can. And then there's the whole idea of effortful initiations, like those hazing rituals in fraternities or the military.
Right, those often seem brutal.
Yeah, but they create a strong sense of commitment and bonding. That West Point cadet who was expelled because he refused to participate in the hazing, that shows how seriously they take it.
But Cialdini makes a really important point about inner responsibility. He says those commitments are strongest when they're truly internal choices, not forced upon us by external pressure.
Absolutely. Remember that study with the forbidden toy? The kids who were only given a mild warning not to play with the robot, they were much less likely to touch it even weeks later compared to those who were given a severe threat.
So they internalized the rule.
Exactly, which is a great lesson for parents. Using gentle reasons and explanations can be much more effective than harsh punishments.
That makes sense. And then there's that car sales tactic.
The low ball.
Yeah, the low ball. They reel you in with a great price, get you all excited, and then bam, all those extra fees appear.
And by that point, you're so committed, it's hard to walk away.
Ugh, I hate that. So how do we avoid falling for these commitment tricks?
Honestly, sometimes it's just about listening to your gut. If you get that feeling, like something isn't right,
Yeah, I know that feeling.
that's a sign to step back, reevaluate, ask yourself, if I knew then what I know now, would I still make the same decision?
Good point. And like with that magazine salesman Cialdini talked about, the one who said, you seem like a really sharp person before trying to close the deal.
Right, he's trying to get you to agree with him, to like him, so you'll be more likely to say yes to his pitch.
So recognize the tactic and then walk away.
Exactly. All right, let's move on to social proof.
Oh, social proof. That's the whole everybody's doing it phenomena.
Essentially, yeah. We tend to look to others for guidance, especially when we're uncertain.
Which is why you see all those ads that say fastest growing or largest selling.
They're trying to create the impression of popularity, even if the product is, yeah.
And those charity telethons with the constant stream of donor names scrolling across the bottom of the screen.
It makes it seem like everyone's donating, so you should too.
Even that thing about nightclubs, creating artificial lines outside to make it look like the place is packed, it's all social proof.
Right, there's this great quote from Cavett Robert, 95% imitators, 5% initiators.
So we're all just sheep following the herd.
Well, to some extent. And that doomsday cult Cialdini writes about is a pretty extreme example.
Oh, the one who thought the world was going to end.
Yeah. Before the supposed flood, they didn't really try to recruit new members. But then, when the world didn't end,
Awkward.
they started actively trying to convert people. They needed social proof to validate their belief system, to convince themselves they weren't crazy.
That's like the opposite of how most groups operate.
Right. It's a fascinating case study. And then, of course, there's the bystander effect.
Yeah.
The tragic case of Catherine Genovese.
That's the woman who was murdered, and all those people saw it happen, but nobody helped.
Yeah, Latane and Darley studied this phenomenon. They found that the more bystanders there are, the less likely any one person is to intervene.
But that doesn't make any sense. Wouldn't more people mean more help?
Well, the thing is, when everyone else is just standing around, we assume the situation must not be that serious. It's called pluralistic ignorance.
Plus, I guess, everyone thinks somebody else will call the police.
Exactly. Diffusion of responsibility. So a key takeaway for you, for everyone listening, if you ever need help, be specific. Point to someone in the crowd and say, you, call 911. Don't just assume someone else will take charge.
Okay, that's good advice. I'll remember that. So, social proof is most powerful when we see people similar to ourselves doing something, right?
Absolutely. We're much more influenced by those we identify with, like that study with the lost wallet, the one where people were more likely to return it if the letter inside was written by someone who seemed similar to them.
So, like, if they thought the person was the same age or something like that.
Exactly. And I'm thinking about that story you told about your son and the swimming lessons, how he was more likely to follow the lead of another kid who was a good swimmer than to listen to your reassurances.
Oh, yeah, Tommy. He was a natural in the water. My son totally looked up to him.
See, social proof in action. But of course, this principle can have a dark side too.
Yeah, like with suicide contagion.
It's tragic, But research has shown that publicized suicides can actually lead to an increase in similar deaths, especially in the same region where it was reported.
Like people who are already vulnerable, they see it and think, maybe that's an option for me too.
It's a heartbreaking example of how powerful social influence can be. And then there's the Jonestown mass suicide. That was a horrific situation, but the researchers argued that social proof played a role there too.
Because everyone else was drinking the Kool-Aid.
Well, it's more complex than that, of course.
Yeah.
But they were in a completely unfamiliar environment under immense pressure from a charismatic leader.
Right, Jim Jones. It was a perfect storm for social proof to take hold.
So the key insight here is to be wary of blindly following the crowd, especially in high-pressure situations. Take a step back, think critically, and try to assess the situation for yourself.
Yeah, that whole look up and around idea.
Exactly. And be aware that social proof can even be manufactured. Remember clacking.
Clacking.
Yeah, back in the day, theaters would hire people to applaud and cheer during performances.
No way! So they were like paid to fake enthusiasm.
Exactly. They were creating the illusion of social proof to influence the audience's reaction. It happens in more subtle ways today.
So what you're saying is we can't always trust the crowd.
Exactly. Think critically, use your own judgment. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about liking.
Liking. Well, it makes sense that we're more likely to do things for people we like, right?
Oh, of course. And Cialdini identifies several factors that influence liking. Physical attractiveness, for instance. Studies show that attractive people are more persuasive and get more help.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Then there's similarity. We tend to like people who are similar to us in terms of opinions, background, even things like smoking habits.
So salespeople trying to find common ground with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's why good salespeople will try to build rapport, find shared interests.
Mirroring and matching, right. That always feels a little creepy to me.
Well, it can be if it's not done subtly.
Mm.
And compliments, of course, those always work.
Who doesn't like a compliment?
Right. And then there's the power of cooperation. Remember Sharif's experiment with the eagles and the rattlers?
Refresh my memory.
He divided boys at summer camp into two groups, and they quickly became rivals.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
But then he introduced these challenges that required the groups to work together. And that cooperation, it really helped to break down those barriers.
So working towards a shared goal can actually make us like each other more.
Exactly. Think about those bad cop, good cop interrogation techniques. The bad cop is all mean and threatening, and then the good cop comes in all friendly and understanding.
And you're supposed to, like, confess to the good cop because he seems so much nicer in comparison.
Right. It's a classic manipulation of liking. And then there's association.
Association.
Like, we tend to dislike things that are associated with negative experiences or people. Think about how weathermen get blamed for bad weather, even though they obviously have no control over it.
Or those mothers who used to say, you're known by the company you keep.
Exactly. And then there are celebrity endorsements.
Oh, yeah. Those are everywhere. They're trying to create a positive association between the celebrity and the product.
Right. Same with political endorsements.
Mm-hmm.
And even sports fans. They'll say, we won if their team wins, but they lost if their team loses. They want to be associated with the winners.
Interesting. So how do we protect ourselves from being unduly influenced by liking? Because it's not always a bad thing, right?
No, of course not. Liking people is good, but it's important to be aware when your liking for someone might be clouding your judgment. If you find yourself feeling, I don't know, overly fond of a salesperson, take a step back.
And focus on the product itself, not the person selling it.
Exactly. Remember that story Cialdini told about the guy who suddenly realized why Tupperware parties were so successful? It's because people felt obligated to buy from their friends, even if they didn't really need another plastic container.
Okay, that makes sense. Moving on. Authority.
Ah, yes, authority. That's a powerful one. We're taught from a young age to respect authority figures.
Obey your parents, obey your teachers.
Right. And Milgram's obedience experiments really highlighted how strong that impulse is. People were willing to administer what they thought were painful electric shocks just because a guy in a lab coat told them to.
It's scary how easily we can be influenced by authority. And sometimes it's not even real authority, right? Just the appearance of it. Like that old Robert Young commercial where he played a doctor recommending Sanka coffee.
Right, he wasn't actually a doctor, but he played one on TV, so people trusted him. It shows how powerful those symbols of authority can be.
Titles, uniforms, you name it.
And clothing. Remember that study where people were way more likely to follow a jaywalker if he was wearing a suit?
Seriously.
Yeah, it's crazy. And then there are those con artists who use fake uniforms and badges to scam people. So it's not just about being obedient, it's also about being skeptical.
So how do we defend against that?
Ask yourself, is this person really an expert? And are they trustworthy? Don't just blindly accept what they say because they have a fancy title or wear a uniform.
Good advice. Okay, what's the last principle?
Scarcity.
Scarcity. The less there is of something, the more we want it.
Exactly. Less is best, and loss looms larger.
That's catchy. But yeah, totally true. Limited time offers, limited quantities.
Those tactics play directly into our fear of missing out. Like that example with the Mesa Temple. When it was only open to non-Mormons for a limited time, suddenly everyone wanted to go.
I remember that.
Or appliance sales that advertise only 2 left at this price, even if it's not true.
Right, they create this artificial sense of urgency.
It's like that old vacuum cleaner sales trick where they tell customers they can only visit their neighborhood once.
Really? I never heard of that.
It's a way to make the opportunity seem more valuable, more scarce.
So why are we so susceptible to scarcity?
Well, partly it's because we use it as a shortcut to judge quality. We assume that scarce things must be more valuable,
Makes sense.
but also it triggers psychological reactance.
Reactance.
It's our natural desire to maintain our freedom of choice. When something becomes less available, we feel like our freedom to choose it is being threatened.
Like reverse psychology.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
And it often kicks in around age 2. You know how toddlers suddenly become obsessed with things they can't have?
Oh, yeah.
That's reactance in action, and it continues throughout our lives. Think about the Romeo and Juliet effect.
Forbidden love.
Exactly. Parental interference often makes the relationship seem more desirable.
Because it's off limits.
Right. And there's that study where juries awarded higher damages in a lawsuit when they were told the defendant had insurance.
Really? Why?
The researchers think it's because the information about insurance was inadmissible, so the jurors felt like their freedom to consider it was being restricted.
So they reacted by awarding more money.
Exactly. And scarcity is especially powerful when something has recently become less available. Remember that cookie study?
The one where they took cookies out of the jar?
Yeah. The cookies were rated as more desirable when there were only 2 left, but even more desirable when they started with 10 cookies and then most were suddenly removed.
So the feeling of losing something makes it more desirable.
Exactly. It's that feeling of, oh, no, I might miss out. And that can lead to some pretty irrational decisions.
So how do we deal with scarcity?
The key is to be aware of that emotional surge that often accompanies scarcity. Take a deep breath and ask yourself why you really want this thing.
Is it truly valuable, or do I just want it because it's scarce?
Exactly. Because those scarce cookies, they didn't actually taste any better.
So we've covered a lot today. Automatic influence, reciprocation, commitment and consistency, social proof, liking, authority, and scarcity. It's mind-blowing to think about how all these principles are at play in our lives every day.
It really is. And hopefully, by exploring these weapons of influence, as Cialdini calls them, you'll be a bit more savvy, a bit more discerning in your interactions.
Right. It's not about being paranoid or distrusting everyone.
No, not at all.
It's about understanding the game, so to speak, so you can make more informed decisions. And I think going back to that jewelry store story, it really highlights how these principles can be used in all sorts of situations.
Definitely. And there's so much more in Cialdini's book. I highly recommend giving it a read if you haven't already.
Yes, influence. It's a classic for a reason. And it really makes you think, about the future of persuasion, especially in our digital age.
Right. With technology and social media, these tactics are becoming even more sophisticated.
So how do we stay ahead of the curve? How do we maintain our autonomy in a world where we're constantly being bombarded with these subtle influences?
That's a great question.
And one that I think we all need to be asking ourselves.
Absolutely.
Okay, that was fascinating. Thanks for joining me today.
My pleasure.
And to everyone listening, keep those minds sharp out there.